Hey, welcome back to another episode of Good Podcasting. This is the show where we really want to help you be successful as a podcaster by providing a playbook for new podcasters. Today, I'm talking to a gentleman by the name of Jason Stone. Jason, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we got connected through YouTube, some of the content I was creating, and you reached out, and you and I have kind of developed this back and forth of content creation and learning from one another. And I love what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to getting into that. Give us just a little taste of what your podcast is about before we dive in too deep.
Yeah, so I'm 53 years old. I have prostate cancer. It's stage 4, and it's metastasized to my spine, and I needed an outlet to talk about it. I needed some way to tell people and share information, share what I've learned. So I started a podcast.
That's a great way to do it. Well, let's jump into the intro, and we'll get back to more of you and your story and your podcast right after this.
See you soon.
All right, we're back. Welcome again to this episode of Good Podcasting. I just want to remind you, if you are listening on, Apple Podcasts or any of your favorite podcast platforms, we are now recording these episodes of Good Podcasting. You can find them on YouTube at Summit City Studios. Special playlist listed as a podcast, so make sure you check that out if you'd like to see what we do and what we talk about here. We try not to do too much of the visual content. You'll find that also on Summit City Studios as I walk through kind of my microphone setup and some equipment and some tutorials and things like that. So if you're interested in that kind of content, you'll find that at Summit City Studios as well. But today we have this episode of Good Podcasting with the man I already introduced you to, Jason Stone, who runs a podcast called Prostate Cancer, The Road to Recovery. Jason, once again, glad to have you here. You introduced yourself briefly. Tell me a little bit about your backstory. Before you got into podcasting, who is Jason Stone, the man?
Well, I started off in the Navy. I graduated high school, went to the Navy. I did 20 years, 10 months, 20 days, submarines. And from there, I went into the commercial nuclear world. And I went from living in Hawaii to living in Minnesota. And I lived out there for 9 years.
I have so much I want to ask about that change.
There's so many stories. That's a whole hour-long other thing we can do.
You went from land surrounded by water to a bunch of lakes surrounded by land. Like, you kind of went backwards in that. Isn't Minnesota the land of the lakes? Is that what they call it?
It is, yep. Okay. 10,000 lakes.
Yeah, I thought I had that right.
Coming from other places where I've seen real lakes, they're more ponds. Don't tell them I said that.
I would imagine so. They're not too far from the Great Lakes, but True. Yeah, they're not quite that big. So what was the move from Hawaii to Minnesota like?
Oh, it was so many things were changing in my life at the time, right? I was getting out of the Navy. I was retiring and trying to figure out. And when you get out, you have to pick something. You say, what am I going to do and where am I going to live so they can send all your stuff there? And I'd applied for a job in Idaho. I'm originally from Pocatello, Idaho. That's where I grew up.
Okay.
And then, so they have a bunch of test reactors out there in the desert. And I was like, I want to go work there. And I tried applying and getting out there and interviewed well. And they said, yeah, we're just dealing with some HR stuff. We're going to send you an offer. And I waited. And I just kept getting a runaround. And finally I got cold feet and decided to interview somewhere else just as a backup plan and landed there.
Okay. All right. And now you're in Washington State.
I am.
And living a life out there back to Idaho's northwest, right? If I have my geography correct.
Yeah.
Northwest United States. So kind of closer to home now.
It is. Yeah, which is kind of nice. And I'm really settled in here now. I found a nice community here in the Tri-Cities. There's a college where some of the guys from work were teaching some classes, and they're like, hey, you want to come help teach some classes in the evening? And I was like, sure. So it's like advanced thermodynamics, reactor plant materials, basically nuclear plant stuff. And so I picked a couple of those up, and now I'm just doing that every quarter. Every quarter I teach 1 or 2 classes, and that's kind of what started all of this, right? I didn't need any I didn't ever have a thought of doing a podcast or needing a camera and a computer and an
Right?
iPad and a microphone and a stream deck and another camera and a vocab. I mean, it's just ridiculous what I'm looking around at now. And it all started with the college. I was teaching those classes, and COVID hit, and they're like, "Hey, you can't come teach in person." I'm like, "Well, how am I going to do this?" And so I started another channel where I was recording videos of my lectures, sort of. They were so bad. But that's where I cut my teeth on how to edit, how do I use this camera, how do I record a video. And so this lectures and learning thing, it was nice because that's where I went through all my growing pains with the technology for the most part.
Yeah.
And so when this happened, I was able to just, you know what, I'm going to take some of this stuff that I already have and do this.
Yeah, it's interesting how many people jumped into video content creation or podcasting in COVID. For some, it was just a hobby because everything else shut down. They didn't know what to do, and they thought, let's try this. And some, out of necessity for work, jumped online. And so I was one of those that jumped on early, had another channel. It started in February of 2020. So I was not a product of the pandemic. I was just ahead of the curve about a month before everything shut down. But I totally understand. You know, I had been podcasting since 2018, not knowing what I was doing when I started that. And then I jumped into YouTube just to learn it and not knowing anything about that. So I understand that learning curve and the desire or the need, I guess, for equipment and the desire for new and better equipment, always, upgrading and just wanting something new. I'm kind of a gearhead in that way. And you gotta, there's only a budget for so much. And so
yeah, absolutely. But I like one of the messages you have on one of your videos where some of this stuff is really neat. You know, it's neat to have the Rode microphone and the Canon whatever and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But don't let that stop you from starting, right?
No.
One of the things that like people in the technical nuclear field is they want to know everything about something before they go do it. And this isn't that type of thing. This is literally grab your phone, start recording, jump into it, and learn as you go. And I love that about this.
Yeah. And I had to learn that myself too. Like I have a science-minded brain too. So I wanted anything I've ever done, I've wanted to have planned out before I take that first step. And I really had to learn. There's only so much research you can do because it's always changing when you get into the content creation world. So just jump in where you're at and start with what you have. And so I'm glad that you pulled that out. I started with my phone and a little microphone that was about this big that wasn't any good, and I went with it. So so you've done. I want to you sent me a little bit of a bio. You're number one. You're a pretty smart dude. You're a pretty tough dude living on a submarine because that's a hard life. I know somebody that's doing that now. Working in nuclear power and teaching classes in thermodynamics. You started teaching classes online, but you also had, I think, where I first connected with you, you had a leather craftsman channel or a leather making channel, right?
Yeah. That's actually where my studio is in the middle of my leather workbench. So I'm doing a bag for my daughter. I've got a daughter that lives in Egypt, and I want to make her a nice zippered big tote bag for the markets and stuff.
Yeah.
And
nice.
Yeah.
So lots of hobbies, it sounds like, and you found a way to even live out those hobbies by doing content creation as well. So I guess my point in saying that is you've got a lot of background in, maybe not a lot of background in content creation, but you have other experience before you got to what you're doing now currently with the Road to Recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. I was doing, especially when COVID hit, I was working at home and I'm like, you know what? Every time I take a break, I'm going to work on making something. I'm going to work on, here's something I made during COVID, just a tiny little zippered tote bag to hold the mouse and some charging stuff, right? And
Yeah.
I was like, well, I'm going to try and video this. And I can't show you the camera now, but I got a camera right above me that
Sure.
looks straight down, and I was recording content and trying to figure out YouTube. And that's really where I that's where I figured out YouTube and doing videos and what does it mean to have content creation, to do content creation and have an audience and try and figure out what do people want to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it sounds like maybe it was a natural step then as you started this journey with prostate cancer and you're documenting your trip through your treatment and recovery and all of that. Was that a hard step to make, or was that hey, let's do this? I've already got the stuff. Let's talk about it.
It was such a weird, sudden thing. I was about 2 weeks before my first radiation treatment, and I was struggling with where I was because the diagnosis process for prostate cancer is stressful because you get a PSA, a blood test, and then if you get another one, and then maybe I got I got a third one because they want to make sure before they go doing anything invasive.
Sure.
And so then they do the DRE, the digital rectal exam, and they do then they start doing scans. They do bone scan, CT scan with contrast, PSMA PET scan. So as you're going through all those take a week or two to set up. They take time, and meanwhile, my first diagnosis was you're young, the PSA test. Hey, it's probably prostate cancer, but you're young. It's going to be not a big deal. We're going to do surgery, and then it just graduated. And so while I'm going through all this, the stress is building. My prognosis gets worse. We find out more. We find out it's metastasized. And I started talking about it immediately at work, but not in a healthy way. I was just walking up. People would say, hey, how you doing? Great, except I have cancer. And it's not fair to do to people. Looking back, I handled that so horribly. I was doing knock-knock jokes that were so awkward. Knock-knock, who's there? Cancer. Cancer who? And then you walk away. They're like, wait a minute, are you telling me something?
Oh, man.
I
feel like humor, though, is a natural way to deal with things, healthy or not. I think a lot of people go there.
Yep.
So, especially with a traumatic diagnosis like that can change
and
your life.
What
in a big
became
way.
clear to me is whether through humor or whether through the jokes or I needed some way to talk about it. And I started going around at work and asking other guys, like, hey, have you ever heard of this? Because nobody had ever said, Jason, as soon as you hit 40, start getting your blood tested, your PSA tested. And nobody had ever said that. And so I started doing that. And then one day before treatment, I got my stuff together and I thought, what would it take? What is a podcast? I didn't even know. And so I started doing a bunch of Googling, to use it as a verb. And it just took off from there. And so the first episode was just a few hours after my first radiation treatment. And that was pretty rough. It was a pretty rough episode. It was a pretty rough everything, but I did it. And as soon as I did that first episode, that first step, I was hooked. And I was like, this is what I want to do.
Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine right after the treatment to sit down and record and all of that. Holy cow. That's a lot of courage and, putting yourself out there for sure, which I think is one thing, not to steer off of your story a little bit, but I do want to address that a little bit. I think that's something for new podcasters that, or content creators just in general, is the fear of putting themselves out there. If it's recorded, it's out there forever. What are people going to think? But to be specifically in the spot that you were in to do that, I think was pretty admirable in being willing to just do it and put it out there and leave it out there. A lot of people take down that first episode. But to see kind of where you were at, and especially with what you're doing and documenting your journey, I think that's really valuable.
Well, one of the comments I get the most often is the people that go in and comment on it saying, hey, I appreciate your video. What they appreciate. They share what they appreciate, and that it's raw, emotional, it's not clinical, that I am just sitting down and talking about how I feel and what I learned. and that's what people are commenting on, that's keeping them engaged and coming back. And so I'm not going to ever turn it into something, the medical thing, or though I'm still trying to get my radiation oncologist nailed down to do an interview. But otherwise,
That would
these
be
are
cool.
just from the soul. How do I feel? What's spinning in my brain in the moment? And
Yeah.
that's what I find people like.
And you've done a few interviews, correct, on your show?
I have. My first
Yeah.
one was a test interview. My brother had a back problem. He didn't have cancer, but we sat down and he was able to talk through his back pain and kind of a reaction to how his my diagnosis affected his life. And that was a good one. And then a coworker from work who's been through prostate cancer but had a different path. And then a guy I met from Kansas who just a crazy story. Oh man, that's a whole nother episode. But he went through a different path. Went straight onto chemo within a week because it was so bad, and how
wow.
yeah. And then another guy, Adam, from more recently met. He has his own little YouTube channel. He's doing anything is possible, and he's just doing it with his phone. He's like, I'm going to sit down and talk about it. He's from the Navy too. Maybe there's a correlation there, and maybe sailors just need to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe so. I think most of us probably need to talk about things that we don't often. So I do think it's a pretty healthy thing, just mentally, to get it out and to share. And you mentioned community earlier on in the show. You found a community there where you live that is really good. And I just think I hear content creators, whether it's personal, like people in my neighborhood, people I hang out with, or community
Yeah.
online with other content creators, or other men who are walking through the same journey that you are. I think community is really valuable in life, and so to have a community to process this stuff through with and talk about it with, I think is really healthy. And so I'm glad you found that. And I even think, for me, obviously, well, not obviously, but I'm not currently dealing with prostate cancer. Who knows what the future holds, right? Unfortunately, that's the truth of the world that we live in. But the community that I've found of content creators, to be able to even sit down and talk with you, who runs a very different podcast than what I do, consider that part of the community that is being built online. So I do think it's valuable. I do think it's an audience. There's an audience out there. If you've got something to say, there's an audience that wants to hear it, needs to hear it, should be hearing it, and you've got to find a way to do that. Which brings me to my next question then is, you mentioned engagement with specifically your first video, but what has your engagement been with this newest podcast that you're doing?
So I have a new routine. I get up every morning, and I get up around 4:40 in the morning, and I sit on the couch for an hour with my first cup of coffee, and I answer questions. So I'm trying to answer every single question that comes on, and that used to take like 10 minutes every third or fourth day. Now I'm getting, half a dozen to a dozen questions, comments, people sharing their stories every single morning, and that's just
Wow.
growing. And so I sat there this morning for almost an hour, just typing out responses and talking to people, and it's grown quite a bit. So trying to because I care, you have to care to build this community. Community isn't somebody tells you their story and you go, oh yeah, nice, thanks.
Right.
Right? That's not a community. That's not developing friends and building relationships. So I'm really working on, and I'm getting to know these men that are going through this. I got two good friends now down in Australia, and I got the Kansas and Florida and the UK. There's a guy on I just forgot what island, a French island off the coast of Spain.
Okay.
And he just moved out there, and he's just living his happy life with less stress and going through this. And he does a lot of paddle boarding, and it's awesome to hear and share these stories and talk with them, and everybody share. We all share our experiences. So I forgot what your question was, and I don't know if I answered it.
No, absolutely did. Absolutely did. I was just asking about what's your engagement been like, and I do think that there is an international appeal to podcasting and content creation. I've developed friendships with, I've got two guys in Australia I communicate with regularly, and a couple women in Jamaica that are part of this group that I'm a part of, and just Atlanta. And yeah, I think the appeal of the international community to whatever topic it is that you're talking about on your show, I think is really, really cool that you can do that. So your podcast obviously is very, very niche. And when I talk to new podcasters, one of the things that I hear all the time is when I ask them, what's your podcast going to be about? And it's a lot of, well, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, and I'm going to have different people on to share this and to talk about that. And I'm like, okay, how are you going to keep an audience? Like, it sounds good, right? The more I talk about broad content, I'm casting the net really wide. But really what happens is I listen to one episode and I go, oh, this is great. And then I listen to the next episode, and it has nothing to do with the topic they talked about that got me engaged in the first place. So yours is very niche. And what I'm hearing you talk about is you're hearing stories, you're getting questions, you're building community, because it's people that are really tied in.
Passionate.
And passionate. Yeah.
They're passionate about the topic, and I'm passionate about the topic. And this is just the podcast is a way for us to meet and talk.
Yep. So I'm guessing if you got 12 regular listeners who were engaged, that's probably pretty significant. I know you have more than that, but people that are really engaged.
347 this morning.
Yeah. But you're not necessarily reaching for 3 million listeners to hear you talk about your journey. You're engaging with people who are in the same spot that you are, or have walked this road, or are trying to figure out, they're just getting started down this road, and they're like, I don't know what's in store for me. I think your content is really, really valuable. And I think I just wanted to highlight that for anyone that's listening or watching, because the broader the topic, the fewer the listeners sometimes. The more focused and specific you can get, the more engaged content or more engaged audience you have.
Yeah, and you see there's a couple Facebook groups for podcasting, like a podcast creators and a podcast sharers. And when you see, hey, I'm starting a podcast, and they talk about what the topic is, and it's something over coffee or something, that was nice timing, just right when you're drinking.
Yeah.
When they were, they're talking about relationship advice, or these big, broad. Like, I'm not passionate about those things. Like, it might be, like you say, interesting to listen to once or twice. To have a successful podcast like yours, you are passionate about helping people through this. And when we first met, I was asking questions. I was dealing with this stupid camera up here, this Canon M50, and my audio. I was trying to understand what an audio interface was, and how do I, do I need one? Do I not need one? And I remember so I was passionate about trying to figure this out, and you're passionate about helping me learn that. And so you were answering my questions, and look where we are today. Yeah. And then,
sound great, by the way. Look great, sound great.
It's awesome.
There's a lot of, I didn't mention this earlier. There's a lot of facial hair in this podcast. So if you're watching, look at the glorious beard that Jason's rocking there. Someday I'll get there.
I just had like 5 inches cut off of it too for work trip I did. Yeah, it was just full biker wizard beard. It was awesome.
In fact, since we're talking about it, I wasn't going to go there, but I had a coworker text me a former coworker text me a picture of a video training session I did years ago that she was watching right now. And she just sent me a picture of it, and my beard was like long and scraggly, and I'm like, I'm glad I got that.
No way. Those were awesome.
Oh, man. Well, hey, we talked a lot about your audience and engagement and all that. I'm curious kind of what's next with your journey here with podcasting.
I was asking ChatGPT that this morning. Excuse me. I use AI to come up to help as a soundboard to kind of talk through some ideas like, hey, I want to talk about this, what might be some good talking points and stuff. And I was sitting there thinking, I've done 16 episodes. I've still got 4 or 5 things I know I want to hit. So I know, so I have never set a goal like I'm going to do 10 episodes or 20 episodes and call it quits. I've never done that. So, but it feels like I see the light I see the train at the end of the light of the tunnel or whatever that is. And so I'm like, when am I going to call it quits? And what am I going to do after that? Is there another opportunity to talk about something here? And there is. And so what comes next is eventually, and I'm not eager to start this, I'm still August, it's January now, and in August we'll reevaluate where I'm at with my scans and my cancer and see if this treatment has worked. And if it did, and I'm more than just, if my scans come back how I'm hoping they do, because there's a tiny, tiny, tiny chance that it's curative. And even with the metastasis now because of the treatments. Anyway, I'm hoping that I'll be a survivor and not just a fighter. Right now I'm a fighter and I want to be a survivor. And there are survivors out there. There are cancer survivors that have fought this and gotten rid of it. And I'm thinking I might want to just start a whole new podcast where I do interviews and we talk with survivors, people that have come out the other side successfully, and what did they do? Right? What was it that they did that they credit for their success? Was it flaxseed in their smoothie every day? Was it, whatever it was? And so I think there's an opportunity to explore something there, and that gives people, the fighters, hope. Right? I want to hear, because right now I'm engaged with all the fighters. I kind of want to hear more from the people that have lived through it and have come out successfully. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm looking at. But I'm keeping it all open right now. Just one day at a time, one step at a time.
Yeah. Well, while we're on that, I don't want to bypass. How are you with your health? And I know we talked earlier. You said you have good days and bad days. Where are you in this process of on the road to recovery?
So I appreciate you asking. I did 28 shots of radiation to my nether regions, and I did 5 doses to my spine because it's metastasized to my L1 vertebrae in my spine. And so the radiation's done. I finished radiation treatment October of 2023, and I'm on what they call ADT, so it's chemical castration. And that's pretty rough. If you read up on what that treatment's like and what the side effects are, for example, like a man to be healthy and fit and have energy and do things and maintain muscle mass, you need high testosterone levels.
Yeah.
And there's a band there that's good. And my baseline was 441 before I started treatment. So my last blood test, my testosterone is 3.
Oh, wow.
3. And so that's that will mean something to the people watching this that have had low testosterone, low being, 50, 100, 150.
Yeah.
I am, the only thing that keeps me moving is this podcast and coffee. It's what keeps me moving through the day. I am animated by coffee, and just the desire to put this content out, which I've got a nice little, I'm not keeping a formal schedule. It's when I have an idea and when I put something out, it's roughly come out to about 1 episode a week. And so how am I doing? Today's a good day.
Yeah.
I'm not losing my focus or concentration too bad. The bad days like yesterday, I'll be in the middle of sentence after sentence and just completely forget what I was talking about.
Oh, wow.
And that's frustrating. So, yeah.
Well, and you have until August of 24, you said, before You
Yep.
reevaluate, kind of. You look at, is that when you have your next scans,
Yep.
and so you evaluate there? Is that annually then that you do that, or?
They kind of play it by ear, kind of like how I'm doing my episodes. Just let's just wait and see how that goes, and then we'll decide. And so that's if my scans are good, they're going to probably wean me off of this chemical treatment, the ADT, androgen deprivation therapy. I take 4 pills called Zytiga every morning, 1,000 milligrams, and I do a shot called Lupron every 3 months. And after August, hopefully that'll be the last of both of those. They'll wean me off, and we'll do a bunch of blood tests week after week after week and see what my numbers do. And as long as my PSA comes up to a low level and just stays low, while my testosterone rebuilds, then I will be considered at least in remission. And if the scans show that the tumors have shrunk or disappeared, then I can be cured. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, maybe we'll have to do a follow-up interview to this.
Heck yeah.
Follow your journey and see what's next for you once those scans come back positive, for like in a good way, not positive for, medical positive is different than.
Yeah, positive means weird things now, right?
Somebody said that at the office the other day. They said we had some scans and everything was positive, so we're good to go. And we're like, wait, positive? What do you? And they're like, no, it was good. It was good. Okay. All right. I get confused on that all the time. So, well, thanks for sharing that. I know we talked earlier, and I just kind of asked, like, what is it that you would share with my audience that maybe I didn't ask about? So I want to give you an opportunity to share that.
I appreciate that. So all men, if they live long enough, will get prostate cancer. So it's a matter of what age will you be? If you're living to your 80s and 90s, you're going to likely die with prostate cancer, which is the ideal situation. You get it, but you don't know, you don't care, there's no symptoms, and you just die, and you didn't. And then they find out later you had it. But they're finding men younger and younger and younger are getting it. And so what the way you test is called a PSA test, prostate-specific antigen. It's a blood test. It's easy to do. Go to your PA or your doctor and just say, hey, can you add PSA to my workup? If you are 40 years and older, get your PSA tested. You want to catch this early, and you should be testing it annually. Every September is Prostate Cancer Awareness Month, which we hear about breast cancer awareness, but we don't hear about prostate cancer awareness. So put it on your calendar. Every September, get your get your PSA checked with the blood test, track that number, and you'll be in a better situation than many. So that's what every September, get tested.
I appreciate that. And probably a kick in the pants for me to get that test done as well. So
if you haven't yet, get it done.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Well, this has been a fun interview. I know we've hit some heavy topics, and I know you deal with heavy topics on a regular basis. And so I just really appreciate, Jason, the way you started seeing some of my content and interacting and asking questions, and it's just developed this bit of a relationship of back and forth. And I pop in on your stuff sometimes and just see kind of what you've got going now and where you were and what you've got going. So this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on Good Podcasting today. I have been doing a new segment called Good Questions, and these are questions that people have submitted either in the comments on my videos or messaging or email or in person at some of the podcast meetups that I host. And so I had one today, and I figured while I've got you here, if you'd participate in helping answer this good question, I'd love to have your thoughts. So here we go. Good questions. This one was another in-person question. I've started getting some online, but I have a few in-person ones from our last podcast meetup. And this one, the question is there a such thing as an ideal program length or an ideal podcast length? And I'll toss it to you to answer that first.
Yeah, so that's tough. It depends on the topic. You do Dr. Google and you say, hey, what is the ideal podcast length? And the number I would find is 20 minutes. Well, I found when I started my short ones are 30 minutes and they go up to 55 minutes. and I'm getting great engagement with it. So the ideal length for my topic is actually pretty long. About 40 minutes is where I'm hitting every time, because that's how long I need to talk about what I want to talk about. And so it comes down to the more specific and discrete your niche, what your podcast is covering, the longer you're able to talk about it, because that's what they're there for. The more specific your audience is, the more specifically identified, the longer they're willing to sit around for that information. If your podcast is a little more broad, it's like a crime and drama. If your niche is crime and drama, that's a pretty broad topic, and you want to keep those to like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe 20. Yeah. Because they're just in and out, and they want to process a bunch of information. So look at how defined your content is and use that to pick your time. If you're a mediumly defined, I guess if I had to come up with an example, I do leatherwork as a hobby. And if I was doing a podcast about leatherwork, I could not sit and talk about how to do a thing for 40 minutes. So that's going to be a 10, 15 minute per episode podcast. Yeah. It'll be a nice, quick, here's something you wanted to learn, and I'm out. And it's not as soulful as a discussion. It's not as emotional. Oh, that's the other piece of that. The more emotional your content is, the longer you can stick around and talk about it. So, did I babble through an answer there?
No, that's really good. That's really good. I really appreciate hearing your thoughts on that. I think you said something that I think is really important is, I putting words in your mouth, but I'm just paraphrasing a little bit. You said, I talk about it usually 40 minutes because that's how much time I need to talk about it. And so I just really, encourage people, talk about it for as long as you need to and no longer. I think the average podcast, and you even mentioned these numbers too, is between 20 and 40 or 20 and 45 minutes. But it really depends on what you're doing and what your podcast is about. And even I always talk about consistency in the length of a podcast, for something like what I'm doing. I appreciate consistency in the length of it. So when listeners jump on and they go, hey, we're going to talk about podcasting, I'm going to learn a new thing, or I'm going to hear an interview today, I try and keep them about the same length. It doesn't always work out that way. Just for the reason that I think podcast listeners, and you've already mentioned this too, is they're loyal. Podcast listeners and viewers are loyal. And so when I release an episode on a Wednesday morning and it's 20 minutes and someone listens to it on their way to work and they really like it, they're going to listen. They're going to come on next Wednesday on their way to work and pull it up. And if it's 3 hours long, they're going to listen to the first 20 minutes until they get to work, and then they're never going to come back to it.
Yep. Exactly.
So it really depends on the content you're doing. And if I'm doing something on YouTube about a mic review, I'm not going to talk about it for 45 minutes. No. I'm going to do a quick 5 minutes. Here's what you need to know, and pop out. So, yeah. So I appreciate what you had to say. It's really about the content that you're delivering and how much time you need to talk about it. In fact, my last Good Podcasting episode that I released before this interview, someone mentioned how great the length of it was. I got a comment about, this is great. I really appreciate your videos. You hit 5 trends in podcasting in 2024, and you didn't hover on any of them too long. Yep. And I went, that's fantastic, because I cut about 10 minutes out of that episode because I talked about them.
I couldn't tell. I watched it last night, and I couldn't tell.
Fantastic. So the magic of editing. Learn how to edit. It'll do you good. Well, again, Jason, thanks so much for joining me on this episode of Good Podcasting. I've really, again, appreciated our conversations. I appreciate what you're doing. I really love it. And I think it's helping a lot of people. Thanks for being a part of this show.
Right, Brian, I really appreciate you having me. I like this format. I like what you do. I love that question thing at the end. That's awesome. I'll be watching for more of those as I watch your videos.
Fantastic.
So, thanks for having me.